What's up, everybody? This is our last talk of the day. Once again, I would like to thank Tripwire Presents for being such an amazing sponsor and sponsoring us through this. So, our last speaker is Lulamile Mohapi. He is the CEO and founder of Fish Knife Game Lab, and he is going to be talking about African games and market relevance. So, let's bring him up right here. Welcome, Lulamile.
Hi, Dan. How are you?
I'm doing amazing. I'm gonna pull your presentation up here, and then it's all yours. Take it away.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Lulamile Muhapi. I'm a founder of a company called Fish Knife Game Lab, which is based in Johannesburg, South Africa. You can find me either on LinkedIn as Lulamile Muhapi, or you can also find me on Twitter as at Lulu Muhapi. So the topic that we're going to be discussing today is called African Games and Market Relevance. Here is the breakdown of the contents of my talk today. We'll be talking firstly about the bars about Africa. What is the bars about Africa? We'll be going through a couple of pointers, which will be around the landscapes, rural, exotic, fantastic, the usual stereotypes that we see that are in the mainstream media surrounding Africa. And then we'll talk about people in successful games from Africa. And then from there, we'll be talking about cultures and languages from Africa. And then also about cultures and languages, we'll be exploring how we can use our cultures as ways within which we can be talking or developing new game styles, new game genres, and so on and so forth, telling new stories and presenting Africa in a very positive and inspiring light so that we can create new, fresh, and exciting IP that's from Africa. Then we'll also be talking a bit about game mechanics, representation of Africans in games. Then I want us to ask ourselves some key questions that we want to discuss if we want to talk about the future of games in Africa and the diaspora. And then obviously we'll be talking about investment opportunities that are in place or investment opportunities that we can find through investing in games that represent cultural heritage from Africa. And then the second point of my presentation will be around game studios and the developer culture in Africa. Around that, we'll have a couple of pointers around the Europe and or the Euro-Western cultural ideology, Black African game development cultures, as well as double consciousness and cultural identities, market relevance, as well as investment opportunities in there. Then the third part of my presentation will be around game investment in Africa and the diaspora. Then the last part will be around diversity and game investment in Africa and the diaspora. So, what is the buzz about Africa? A lot of people around the world, when they hear about Africa, they hear about huge landscapes, huge rural landscapes, about animals, the big five, elephants, zebras, all sorts of animals running around. There's exotification of Africa. It's an exotic place, beautiful, beautiful sunsets, beautiful weather, and so on and so forth. It's fantastic. I think it makes for a great level design for video games if you're a level designer. Um, but there is some element of a European gaze as we see it from the mainstream media. So those are some of the images that we see when we discuss Africa from a global perspective. But what you can see on the two photographs on the side, on the right side of the slide, is that one is another one of the successful games from Africa. This one is it's a fighter game that is set in West Africa, and then on the far right we have the award winning. This game has just won three awards. One of the awards being the best game for the year, um, um, amongst other awards that the game has awarded. Is called the President. It's published by a publisher called what's the name of the publisher? Carry First, which is one of the biggest startups that are in Africa at the moment. So we'll also talk about people in successful games. So those are some of the examples of successful games that are from Africa. And one other thing that I wanted us to talk about is about cultures and languages in Africa. Normally, when we speak about culture, there's always an overarching narrative around domination of African cultures. But right now, as we can see, there's an element of Africa being represented or presented in a manner that is very much positive, unlike the images that we normally see in Africa. Surrounding game mechanics, when we look at African cultures and cultural identity, we notice that there's a huge potential around games that come from Africa, meaning that when we look at these cultures from a very positive perspective, we can discover that there's a lot we can discover. I think there's so much scholarship around games. There's been so much research that has been done around the diversity of games around the world, especially when we talk about indigenous cultures, the cultures that were part of a colonized state, and so on and so forth. But if we want to change the way in which we look at game development or the future of game development, I suggest that we need to look into African cultural heritage, not only in Africa but in the diaspora, so that we can find new ways of creating new IP and new games that represent Africa in a positive light. Again, talking about representation of Africans in games, in many games we've seen Africans being represented in a negative way, either as black people getting shot. Either we see Africa as a place of disease, and all sorts of negative imagery surrounding Africa. But those are the images that we seek to change so that we can create a very dynamic and vibrant culture, especially around the games that come from the African continent. So, what are the investment opportunities that come from there? The investment opportunities, from the way I see it, is that we have to look at um, how we present the African aesthetic in game design, in game narratives, in different game genres. And we have to invest a lot more in research and involve a lot of people that comes from indigenous cultures that are from Africa. I think I've mentioned representation of Africans in games. These are some of the examples that are out there of successful games that have been produced by big publishers. So we normally see games that depict Africa as a place of war and diseases. But now what these are the kind of images that we want to change. For instance, we don't want to see images of child or of child slavery or children in war and matters of that effect. So what are the key questions we need to ask surrounding investment in Africa, especially in relation to games. We need to ask ourselves these key questions. Do African games or games from African diasporic minorities demonstrate feasible investment opportunity? So these are the questions I would like us to share and discuss as part of this presentation. One other question is that what are the cultural sensibilities do investors and publishers take into account when investing in games from Africa? So, what is it that investors want in Africa? Do they want a European or Eurocentric aesthetic, or do they want something specific that they haven't seen before? But how do we change the narratives about Africa so that we can create a very positive and encouraging and an image that can be sellable to new players so that we can create new IP and create more revenues, especially as game studios and publishers in the value chains of the game industry. And what about the underrepresented minorities globally? What do investors look for in terms of cultural sensibilities? What is it that they want, and how can we balance the needs of the investors in terms of the cultural representation of Africans in games, so that we can meet each other halfway in one way or another. And then finally, what are the areas.
Well, it looks like he lost signal here, so we'll just wait for a minute and see if he comes back. We'll give him a couple minutes and see if he comes back. I wonder if I still have power over his slides. I do have power over his slides. Huh, that's interesting. So we have an amazing. Oh, he's gone. All right, we'll just hang out for a minute and see what happens. We do have an amazing lineup tomorrow. Let me start talking through that here. Let's see, 12-6, 12-6, 12-7. Here we go. I'll start reading this. Automate your way to player happiness with Karis Reed. 100 Days, a winemaking simulation game and its self-publishing strategy with Lisa Fernetti. That'll be awesome. Making sense in a post-pandemic world, navigating fundraising. So we'll be talking about raising funds for your game. Marketing best practices to boost your game's launch. That's awesome. That's an Exola. Wow, my Alexa just went off. That's an Exola panel. Then starting a studio with no experience with Alina Manson. The value of community building with Sam Gee. Excuse me, that's going to be an amazing one. The art and perspective of voiceover. How to incorporate voiceover to enhance your game. Then the last one of the day, the dance of production, finding the production rhythm for your game and team. Oh, it looks like he is back. Let's pull him up. Welcome back.
Oh, thanks, Dan. Sorry, I had a technical glitch.
That's okay. You want to pull up your presentation again, and then we'll get you back on track?
Oh, yes. Thank you. Let
That
me pull
happens.
the presentation. All right.
It was weird because you disappeared, but I still had power over your presentation. All right, so I think you were on page 6. That's where you were. That's what happened when we left off. Okay. All
Yes.
right, I am out of here. Go ahead, proceed, my friend.
All right. Thanks a lot, Dan. So, we said lastly, what are the areas that require improvement so as to balance investment risk versus opportunity in the industry. So, I think we can chat about that together. Remember that I would love us to have dialogue instead of me providing answers to you. I would rather that I would prefer that we have a dialogue and to ask ourselves um, the areas that require improvement. Obviously, there are areas that I see from my perspective around various um, segments of the games industry, but I would love you guys to ask me some of these questions, or we have a conversation around those matters. So we need to move beyond the stereotypes. I think that is the most important part around my presentation. That in most games, as I've mentioned before, there's um, there's so much um, negativity around the presentation or representation of Africans in games, but those are some of the things that we need to change. I think also that filters into investment opportunities that are taking place, and that also takes us into looking into the culture of game design and game development, looking into the evolving scholarship. Remember that game scholarship in and of itself, um, it has evolved in the past 20 years. So how do we ensure that the changing trends within the sector affect us positively in the way we imagine or reimagine the future of the games industry in Africa, in diaspora, and the world in general, so that we can have an inclusive and diverse industry. So, representational diversity is key in the game sector. I argue that it has this has been observed in other mediums such as television, film, theater, literature, animation, and so on and so forth. And I also argue that we are now heading towards a golden era of African games, which will comprise more of games that are made by Africans, be they in Africa or in the diaspora. And also, we must remember that when we're talking about the African diaspora, we're talking about the vastness or the multitudes of Africans around the world, whether they're in America, whether they're in the UK, whether they're in Australia, China, everywhere else in the world. But the African experience, the African cultural heritage, the African aesthetic, the African ways of doing things, African spirituality, African mythology, Africanness in games will be, as I foresee it, one of the talking points around the pending golden age of African games as I see it. Then, here in this slide, I want to take you guys into um, one of the most prominent scholars around diversity in video games. And the name is Anna Anthropy. And I just want to take you through to some of the quotes that are my favorite from her. Um, Here's the first one. The number of stories from marginalized cultures, from people who are othered by the mainstream, that a form contains, tell us something about that form's maturity. So basically, what that means is that um, games now are being seen as a maturing technology, as a maturing art form, as a maturing medium. So within that thinking, within our mindset, we have to ensure that people from marginalized cultures are put into a mainstreamed perspective, as well as a perspective that also humanizes them and sees them in a manner that ensures that um, in especially in a medium such as video games, we see um, the marginalized people as forming um, part of the main IPs that should be selling in years to come and so forth. And then another quote goes as something like this. If a form has attracted so many authors, so many voices, that several of them come from experiences outside the social norm, and bring those experiences and voices to bear when working in that form, can't that form said to have reached cultural maturity? The next quote says, the limitations of games aren't just thematic. Most games are copies of existing successful games. They play like other games, resemble their contemporaries in shape and structure, have the same patterns that interact with the world the same way, and have the same shortcomings. So, again, when we look at the themes of the games that are being seen now, we are seeing indie games taking over spaces in the game development culture that have had no space before. And remember that games in the past years or in the past decades have always been a preserve just for nerds and social outcasts. To a certain extent, but all of that is changing because of um, studies in diversity in games, and all of those studies and scholarship that comes from diverse backgrounds, people from LGBTQIA plus communities, from Black communities, from Latino communities, Asians, and so on and so forth. They are creating more opportunities and affordances in the games community, and all of those, I argue that they will have a very positive and encouraging effect on the bottom line of the games sector in years to come. Here's another quote from an entropy. If there's a vast pool of experiences that contemporary video games are failing to tap, then there's just a large pool of aesthetic and design possibilities that are being ignored to tell different stories. We need different ways of interacting with games. So, again, this confirms what I've been saying, that there's a large pool of game design aesthetics, game design methodologies that haven't been explored yet. I'll make an example. Coming from South Africa, I've developed a prototype for a game on Winnie Mandela around 2018, 2019. And with that particular exercise, I was trying to demonstrate how do we use the medium of video games to tell a historic narrative. So into what you can call a docu game, as other game scholars call. And I've also developed a prototype for another IP, which is centered around the life of crime and redemption in Soweto, in South Africa, which is one of the most famous townships in South Africa. And those are some of the aesthetics that haven't been explored yet in the video games medium, and some of the game mechanics that have been explored in those respective IPs. They reflect a cultural sensibilities, which I argue that investors and publishers need to look into, specific relevance, the specificity of a place, how um, games from a specific place can tell us a different story, and give us as players different experience that we would not get in the other games that are out there in the mainstream gaming culture. So, such thinking, I argue, that must apply to games, investors, funders, publishers, diversity practitioners across the value chains of game development. Then going to investment opportunities, there is a growing availability and popularity of multifunctional gaming consoles which are emerging in the market in helping and growing the market of video games in the African region. And the African region itself is one of the regions in the world where it has around 50% or close to 50% youth population, meaning that there are many young people occupying the African continent. who are under the age of 40. And those are the people that we need to be investing in when we're thinking about careers of the 21st century, where games also are a huge part of. And African studios are making inroads in the global games market, somewhere between indie and the mainstream games market. I've made an example of a games such as one from Carryfest. There are a lot of other examples if one can look on the internet of games that are coming from Africa, and those games that are making inroads are games that are sort of giving you an alternative experience to what one would expect from games that are normally out there in the mainstream. The video games market in South Africa has witnessed strong growth in the past few years. Um, it is also expected that there will be more than 11 million gamers in South Africa. So these are the are some facts that are coming from one of the industry bodies, which is called Games Industry Africa. So some of these statistics they provide an insight into the pending golden age of African games and how African games are taking the world by storm, and we should be excited about that. And there's more to that because, for instance, countries like Kenya, Nigeria, Uganda, and other top game developers in the African region are bringing millions of dollars through a multitude of gaming platforms, be it in the Xbox. There's also a surge of esports games and esports companies around the continent. If we watch closely, and all of those developments, they show to us that um, the future of games and gaming and game development in Africa is very much bright for the years ahead. Let's talk now a bit about game studios and the developer culture. I did initially speak about the European and Western cultural ideology in when we speak about the game development culture, the startup cultures, and the investment cultures in Africa. But we need to delve deeper. I argue that when we look at Western and European cultural ideology, those they do not represent the African um, aspirations to a certain extent, and those are some of the changes that we need um, to 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 ensure that we effect so that the future of games in this continent becomes um, an inclusive one so that everyone around the world can enjoy games from Africa. And then about black African game developers and black game development cultures. Um, on this point, I can say that there's little that black game developers have received in terms of sponsorship and funding, but that trend is changing because now we've seen, for instance, various governments around the world coming to invest in Africa so that there can be a brighter future for African startups that are black owned. And also, we do have a skills deficit, a deficit in the continent. So, meaning that we have to invest more in game design skills. We need to invest more in games scholarship. We need to invest more in startups and accelerators to ensure that the skills pipeline to ensure that the industry grows bigger. We have to ensure that black Africans and black game developers are supported in every way imaginable. I won't go that much into double consciousness because it speaks into the issue of cultural identities. But what I can help you understand at this juncture is that double consciousness is a way in which Africans see themselves within their own eyes, and the way within which they are seen by the outside or the European gaze. So, in one way or another, African games or games that are developed by black game developers, they have a way within which we see this double consciousness. We see a way within which one struggles to represent themselves authentically, and those are some of the challenges that we experience as black developers in the sector. And I do foresee that there will be a significant change with how we see ourselves, especially with more investment coming into games that are developed by black developers. Obviously, not all of them will be big hits in the global market, but the more games we develop, I believe that the more we'll have a diversity of content, so that we develop more um, studies, and we study more about African cultures. Um, and then through studying more about African cultures, we find ways of developing new IPs. And then within the development of new IPs, the industry grows, and there will be more profit either for investors and so on, but there will be more return on investment for publishers and other players in the value chain. In terms of market relevance, we do ask ourselves every time whether is there market relevance or investor readiness. But there are a lot of factors that come into market relevance. For instance, when we look at, as I've mentioned about double consciousness, um, how do we see ourselves as Africans in relation to the dominating market, or the hegemony that's taking place, the cultural hegemony. How do we ensure that our games or games developed by Africans find a space in the market? How do we ensure that our relationships become easier between ourselves and the publishers? And those are some of the changes that are gradually taking shape in the African continent as well as the diaspora. Still on the game studios and the development culture, I want to ask these questions. For instance, who is this emergent game developer? The emergent game developer is someone from Africa, is someone black, whether it's a black woman from a marginalized community, and from where does she speak? So from here, I quote from Stuart Hall, where he speaks about practices of representation. And he says, practices of representation always implicate positions from which we speak or write and develop games. Um, so meaning that we speak from the position of enunciation. And again, this speaks about positionality. When we talk about games, we have to speak from a position of being people who were previously dispossessed, or from outside the technological centers, or the being in the periphery of technological development and game development. But all of this is changing because there has been a lot of changes in the African continent throughout the years. And then if you can see in the pictures that I've put in here, um, in the middle picture we see a picture of children of different races, and that is the picture in South Africa at present, because South Africa is a place with a wealth of cultural diversity. We have about 11 official languages. We have people from different cultures and backgrounds, religious, and so on and so forth. And all of those, I argue that they can give us enormous amount of new IPs or new strategies to develop new games that can be put into the market, therefore creating new revenue streams and new um, investment opportunities. Then, still on the game studios and developer culture, I'm quoting here um, entropy. No, 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 no. I'm quoting. Sorry, I am quoting Stuart Hall once more, where he speaks about cultural identity. This is from an essay which he wrote, which is called "Cultural Identity and the Diaspora." He says here in the first quote, there are at least two different ways of thinking about cultural identity. The first position defines cultural identity in terms of one shared culture, a sort of collective one true self hiding inside the many other more superficial or artificially imposed selves, which people with a shared history and ancestry hold in common. I need to check my time here whether I'm still right on time. Then the second quote goes like this in a quote. Within the terms of this definition, our cultural identities reflect the common historical experiences and shared cultural codes which provide us as one people with stable, unchanging, and continuous frames of reference and meaning beneath the shifting divisions and vicissitudes of our actual history. This oneness underlying all other more superficial differences is the truth, the essence of Caribbeanness, of the Black experience. It is the identity which a Caribbean or Black diaspora must discover, excavate, bring to light, and express through, as I paraphrase, ludic or gamified representation. So then he finally says, we should not for a moment underestimate or neglect the importance of the act of imaginative rediscovery, which this conception of a rediscovered essential identity entails. Hidden histories have played a critical role in the emergence of the most important social movements of our time, be they feminist, anti colonial, and anti racist. And all of these hidden histories are some of the things that we are trying to excavate and bring to light, because as we speak about diversity in the game development practice, we need to bring to the fore all of that which has been hidden or misrepresented or distorted by the mainstream media or racist structures and so on and so forth. But those show us that if we come together and bring about a very inclusive and diverse community of game developers, game designers, and so on and so forth, we can be an industry that can be growth orientated. Now we're gonna talk about games investment in Africa. Um, what I've in what I've experienced in the past number of years was that in South Africa, most of the people who speaks about games are white people. It's white studios, and in Africa, in general, there are other people who speak about games. Obviously, when we speak about Africans in African diaspora, we find that um, the game industry has been white, but we're trying to change that narrative so that there's a bigger slice or share of representation on the investment side about games and game studios and so on. And whether we speak about indie or mainstream or blockbuster video games, um, some of these things remain to be seen because there are small features or small victories that we have seen over the years, as one has spoken about in this presentation. I also speak about startups, accelerators. We want to see exits and growth of the entire African game sector. But all of this, they need all of this. It requires serious investment and a serious um, look into diversity and cultural representation and so on within the sector. So there are key developments in the investment in Africa and the diaspora. And one of the major drivers of growth of mobile gaming is the potential to spawn a massive real money gaming industry around the continent. There are mobile tech spreads around the continent, and large swaths of Africa are also paving the way for legal betting and gaming. But acceleration in network rollouts by mobile operators in sub-Saharan Africa has been a vital driver for the reduction in the coverage gap. So there's also investment in infrastructure development, 5G technologies, a lot of investment in technological infrastructure that we need to look into in terms of strategies that we look into for the sustainability of the sector. In this slide, I present to you some of um, the information that comes from games industry Africa, which highlights the number of players in the continent, with Nigeria being the highest, followed by Kenya and then South Africa. But South Africa has the highest number of games. It's not just about population, but South Africa has about 24 million games from the last time I checked. 24 million gamers. I think that number includes casual gamers and other types of gamers as um, the gaming demographics um, grow or develop over the years. Then the this is a slide around revenues. So South African or North Africa is the largest amount of revenues when it comes to games, and in the sub-Saharan, um, the games sector has been growing exponentially, as we can see in the revenues in the slides. Then there's also startup activity that we can look into, and all of this information comes from either from Games Industry Africa and Statista, Newzoo, and other information consultants around the continent that are looking into the growth of the industry. One needs to look into that and see where is the growth potential, and what is it that we can change and see for the future and the survival of the games industry and the inclusivity of the Africans in the games industry globally. Then, in terms of cultural or diversity in the games investment in Africa, there are a lot of things that we need to look into. One, being cultural plurality. um, we need to look into, for instance, the South African example being a country with multiple cultures, or a multicultural country, and how we can present that as one of the key factors which we can look into when we thinking around or rethinking investment in the games in South Africa, or diversity in games. Then there are more opportunities, especially around linguistic diversity, because I think there will be money spinner in the future around games that speak to local languages. I mean, remember that in Nigeria alone, there's 250 languages that have been spoken. I said in South Africa there are 11 official languages. So from this, we can see that there could be a potential of multiple revenue streams and new business models. Um, Not necessarily disrupting the existing models, but in one way or another, adding to the growth of the industry, and not only locally but globally and in the diaspora, meaning that there will be new employment opportunities as we look into the growth of the industry for future. So I can see that I'm nearly up on time. I'll quickly help us go into some of the takeaways that I want us to check out. So Africa needs access to gaming technology. Young people from townships, be it Soweto, Kailicha, Lazi, and other parts of the continent and the diaspora. We need access to gaming technology. So investors must check those factors in mind, must have those in mind when thinking about investing in Africa. And then risk reduction and new opportunities. We need to check how to maximize from the opportunities that I've mentioned above, so that there could be a minimization of risk. We need to stay away from exploitative practices, whereby startups are over mentored and underfunded. We need to invest in knowledge production. We need more scholarships in video games, um, because there's a lot or a diverse set of practices, especially as game scholarship is growing by the years. And also, obviously, we need funding. And then we need meaningful diversity programs that are centered around humanizing the other, who has been marginalized throughout the game's practice. Then we also need lobbying and industry support, giving voice to marginalized gamers, developers, and designers, and take heed to cultural diversity and plurality. And we also, on the decision makers side, we need to invest in startup capitals for growth and sustainability. Before we get into VCs, we need genuine SMME support. I think in terms of SWOT analysis, throughout my presentation, I have spoken about strengths and weaknesses, and we've seen the opportunities and threats. And with that in mind, I can say the African market is a very diverse one in terms of gender, race, and other intersectionality issues. And this is where we can see ourselves as a diverse and inclusive industry, and we need more support from the global industry, just as Indie Trip and other sponsors have done. And I think I'll end up there. Thank you.
That was excellent. Thank you so much. Did you want to shout out your website or anything, or any projects you're working on right now?
Oh, currently we're working on an unannounced IP. We won't announce it, but you will have to you will have to get it during the pre-sales time. But we will keep you guys posted. Keep out just keep looking out for Fish Knife Game Lab, and look out for at Lulu Muhapi on the social media platforms, and we will most definitely keep you posted on the games, on the IPs that we will be developing in the next couple of months. Thank you.
Fish Knife Game Lab. Where did you come up with that name?
All right. So is that the first part of the Q&A?
Yeah, that's it. There's no questions from chat, so yeah, that's I'm asking you. Where'd you come up with that name?
Yes. I'm originally from Cape Town, so before I came to Johannesburg, it was just a name I came up with. A fish knife is a knife, of course, but it speaks about being streetwise and being sharp and knowledgeable.
Hmm. Oh,
Yeah,
nice. I like it.
yeah,
So we had a comment here. They
yeah.
said this was way back in the beginning of your presentation. So far,
Yes.
good questions. I think there are many people interested in the stories and cultures of Africa. So it depends on the investor. I would flip the question and ask, what does African studios need from their investors in order to feel comfortable with handling their IP? That's interesting.
Actually, yes. I think what we need from investors, firstly, then is an understanding of the African cultures, African cultural heritage. Of course, there's so much education that needs to be put out as part of investment strategies. Remember that investors themselves, they need to be schooled on the markets that they're investing in. So if you're investing in games, say for instance, games from Kenya, it might be a bit different to the games that are from South Africa because of cultural nuances, and a lot of us as marginalized people in the sector, or previously marginalized, so to speak, in the sector. Um, there's cultural heritage, there's spirituality, there are a lot of things that the mainstream media narratives haven't looked into or sort of praised in terms of storytelling. So those are some of the things I wish investors could look into, because if you look at most African studios, if you read about most African studios, you find that a lot of them, they're trying to rehumanize themselves, to rediscover their cultural heritage, or, or reimagine themselves in a manner that hasn't been seen before by the mainstream media and the mainstream games industry before.
So do you think it has to be, it should be a mix of that, or that people should just go back to what you're talking about?
Uh, I think it should be mixed. I don't think that there should be a dichotomous I'm thinking around it, where there's a good and bad, where to say the European way of thinking about games is bad.
Mhm.
Obviously, we've learned a lot from Euro Western media and Euro Western games throughout the years, and we still use similar game design principles, game mechanics, aesthetics, and so on. But uh, we need to learn from each other through investing whether it's mythology or different narratives around our heritage, and then give voice to that, and especially voices that haven't been heard before. And what we're seeing now in the industry is that a lot of investors, they want to obviously invest in something that either they've seen before, or something similar, or something exotic. I think we need to move beyond the exotification of Africa, or exotification of blackness,
Mhm.
into creating something more inclusive. You know what I'm saying?
No, that totally makes sense. We have another question here from Alina Likes Cozy on
Yes.
Twitch. And they say, how do we
Thank you.
get more investors in this space? The market is here and there's so much untapped potential. What can Western studios do to support African studios? That's a great question. So let's address that first. How do we get more investors in this space?
um, look, first of all, I want to say, I want to thank you, Dan, and your colleagues. I think you guys are on the right track. I think um, this is an example of genuine support for African studios. We need to hear more stories from Africa, be it games. Again, I mentioned that they don't need to be hits. Even some of the games that are hits now, I'm sure, like you've had developers who failed 50 times or more. So um, what can Western studios do to support African studios? You guys have started already. There are various initiatives around the continent. Last week, there was Africa Games Week, which featured various players from around the world, government, investors. So I think personally, Western studios can help us in educating our governments, our respective governments, in terms of investing in African studios, because there have been lots of accelerators throughout the years, and there hasn't been tangible results. There hasn't been tangible output in terms of games
Mhm.
that make it to the market. There hasn't been many success stories for startups. So educating the government, one, is key, and also um, look at the startups themselves. Obviously, invest in skills as well. I know that it's a very highly competitive industry, but some of the factors that are disadvantaging Africans is that not only the skills, investors from Euro Western, they would look for things that might to an extent seem impossible. For instance, you would want a team of developers who've shipped games before, and what about inexperienced developers? You know what I'm saying? So when we create our teams, we also as entrepreneurs on this side, we want to give young people who haven't had a chance to work in the games industry a chance. So we want that kind of support. When we are saying we are bringing in people who have limited skills, we need that kind of support, and we know that you have various initiatives around apprenticeships, around skills development, and so on and so forth. So I reiterate that you guys are on the right path, and I thank you for that.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank
Do
you.
you
Thank
have any final words? Here, let me bring this off there. Do you have any final words for people out there that are watching or that are going to listen to the podcast after this is over?
Oh yes, be on the lookout for Fish Knife Game Lab. Be on the lookout for games from Fish Knife Game Lab, and do support games from Africa and the African diaspora in any way imaginable, whether it's through funding or whether through skills development initiatives, or whether it's through accelerator programs, whether it's through helping us speak with our government in understanding the potential of games as a 21st century medium, as a 21st century employer, as a 21st century industry that is set up to change the world into a better place. Thank you.
Yes, that's amazing. Also, I would imagine like some big, if we can have some large content creators playing some games that were made in Africa just to get
Yes.
that over in the United States and in Europe, you know. Some content creators playing more and more stuff. There needs to be some kind of a connection there. Well, thank you so much. We've got you're the last one of the day, so thank you so much. And we'll be back tomorrow. Let's see. Let me look and see what time it is. I think it's 8 my time. Yes, it is 8 a.m. my time, which is Central Time. So that is 6 a.m. Or wait, no, I'm backwards. That is 6 a.m. Pacific Time, 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Thank you
Yes.
so much.
Thank you so much.